Radio Okitalk, Radio Okitalk, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Welcome to the Wizard of Odd edition 18 with Bryan Lahr on the emerald tablets of Toth. Welcome.
Hi, Raphael. How are you, man? How's your neck of the woods these days?
I would say we are doing fine. The sun is shining, the birds are singing.
Hey, just out of curiosity, are you having civil unrest in your part of the world?
That's actually a great question. So, about 2 weeks ago, there was a minor incident in the so-called 10th district in Vienna. Interestingly enough, 3 demonstrations were allowed to occur in succession, or let's say announcements. They were done by, that's what they officially say, like left-wing, Kurds and potentially Antifa, interestingly supported by the vice mayor of Vienna, who's a Green Party member. And then you had supposed right-wing grey wolves, potentially supported by the Turkish president. And I guess one of them had an announcement, and then supposedly the other one were crashing them and fighting them or something. And that happened one day. And what's just interesting to me is that after that happened, they actually allowed the other 2 announcements to happen in the same place, which is like this, let's say district where you have a high population of these individuals. So they deliberately kind of let it flow. But recently they had kind of another announcement or something, and now they made apparently a big show of force with the police or something, and everything stayed calm. But during these 3 days, apparently at the worst day, they even had like balconies set on fire and stuff. So it's really like something that actually does not, and dare I say should not exist, happen in Vienna at all. So that's as far as it has gotten. Ideally, that's also all it was.
Yeah, there's a lot of craziness going on here, man, and it's so bizarre because each individual state is responsible for their reaction to this, and you've got Portland, Oregon, where that original Chaz little enclave happened, and there have been continual riots, not demonstrations, that have been going on there for a solid month now, and kind of life there is getting a little crazy, man. It's like I'm not a big fan of authoritarianism and a police state and a scenario where the police have ultimate power to do whatever they want. But, I can say from personal experience, I've had a couple of instances in my life that I was helped immensely by those people. And this whole like defund the police, and to getting rid of any safeguards, where it's kind of happened. There's a number of cities, Minneapolis, Portland, where they're trying to get rid of the police altogether and replace it with something that hasn't actually really been defined yet. But in all of those areas, New York included, man, crime is exploding, like record numbers of shootings like every week, and
Right.
Man, it's just kind of a a system that's breaking down into anarchy in just really frightening ways, and the whole George Floyd thing, where that kind of kicked all this off, was definitely worth like raising some cane about and
Oh yeah,
fixing that. But it's been so hijacked, dude.
Oh yeah, I mean, as always, and the issue is oftentimes that there are real issues, whether with police, whether with certain types of discrimination. These are all very real things, I would say. I just recently heard that even if you look at the original transcript of what happened with George Floyd, the situation appears differently because apparently he may have been on fentanyl, which is slowing down breathing, and at least according to the full transcript, it seems as if this guy himself was asking not to be put in the car, but to be actually put on the ground or to stay on the ground or something. Of course, it's still completely crazy that you would have this police guy on his neck all the time. That's, obvious, right? But even, and this is what sometimes is kind of surprising to me, as soon as something gets so hyped in the media cycle, one always has to assume there are ulterior motives because I'm sorry, but that's just kind of how the show runs, right? And then you look at different factions, the one kind of, famous guy to hate in a sense. And it's just a symbol, of course, is George Soros, who apparently has heavily funded certain movements, which again, on the outward, and certainly many people involved may be amazing, have the best intentions. Then again, apparently somewhat involving potentially Nation of Islam and so on. I'm actually, not totally against Farrakhan. He says some, I think, very interesting things. But if there is some kind of supremacy idea inbuilt somewhere, and it doesn't matter if it comes from being black, being white, being Jewish, being anything, then it's always difficult, right? So that's the one thing I see, and to me it's completely contrived. And if I want to set up a nice, happy commune, I'm not gonna choose a city center of wherever. I mean, that's obviously, sorry, but completely idiotic, right? In my view, at least. And then, of course, I'm all for no police and all of that. It's wonderful, Me individually, for my own life and my friends and so on, I'm happy. I generally don't need them. The few times I interacted with them, it was okay, up to, I would even say, kind of fun, at least in my perspective. But the thing is that, of course, you can defund the police and you can eliminate these kind of artificial and maybe overboarding rules and especially regulations and so on. But you can only do that once you yourself in your own consciousness are regulated enough that you don't need that kind of outward order anymore. And here it just seems to me that there's people who love this idea, but obviously, case in point, also potentially again because it's hijacked, because there may be agitators paid and so on. That's not the way to do it, in my view.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also the whole, well, I personally experienced it this week. I had been working on getting a job from a design firm, and it was kind of a lengthy process going through the whole scenario. This particular design firm had a satellite office located here in Miami, and their home office is in New York. And they wanted to hire me and give me this big ass project, and they sent it off to New York for HR to approve it. And I got told on Friday that I didn't get the job because I'm white, and they're going to give it to a minority.
I just love that. And now tell me how this is not racism.
Dude, it's so over the top. Like, the sad thing about it is, I've my Yafa teacher, black as coal, man. I lived with his family and his whole crowd for 3 years. It never came up. I got called the white boy every once in a while, but it was all joking, and there was no hate. And everybody, and I grew up in the 60s, so I've always been let's just judge people by their actions and what they do, not by their group identity or their color or anything else. And now that seems in many places here that it's the only thing getting considered. Seattle just had a whole big segregated meeting with all of the white people that work for the city, with this talk about how to undo their whiteness. and like this whole list of things they should and shouldn't say and should think. And I mean, it is just, and even the term reverse racism, I mean, that's like you know, that can't exist, you know. And people getting on news things and interviews and saying that black people can't be racist. I mean, every single person in the world can be racist. A woman was just shot over the weekend. She was walking by a Black Lives Matter group that were demonstrating, and she shouted, "All lives matter," and they shot her in the back. What? Killed her.
Oh.
And
yeah, I mean, and just very briefly, even to say that black people can't be racist, if I understand properly, is a racist statement. But yeah, go ahead.
Intrinsically, just in the nature of that, it's intrinsically racist, you know. And you know, you mentioned Louis Farrakhan. Like I've checked out so many of his speeches, and there's nothing inclusive or diverse about that point of view. That's about taking over, you know. And it's kind of scary and really disconcerting to see the viewpoints that are being pushed by you know, the mainstream media. I mean, they used to be news outlets. I grew up in Atlanta where CNN stood, and I remember when that began. And I was an editorial art director for Atlanta Magazine at the time, so we had a bunch of columnists from CNN, and I got to know them very well. And their whole mindset was exposing the truth, like the real truth. And,
oh, really? Wow, that's cool.
And now it has evolved into a propaganda machine, you know, and you really can't believe a single thing they put out. And even when they are putting out facts, it's no longer about what are the facts and make up your own mind. It's trying to, you know,
this is what you have to believe, and if you don't,
yes,
probably you're racist.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. There's no discourse anymore. There's no room for multiple and dissenting opinions. The second you disagree with the narrative, you're a racist, a white supremacist, a bigot. You know, the funniest one was this woman, black woman. I can't remember what network it is. I think it was CNN. Forgive me if I got that wrong. But she was interviewing a black doctor, and you know, gave him some crap for his white privilege. And he goes, "Well, you know, did you know I was black?" You know, and it's like this whole, like, whatever there are all these slogans and you know, marching you know, slogans, and people don't really even know what they mean. You know, they just attach some meaning to it, and it's like they just get on this parade, you know, and start screaming shit. And it's kind of it's the weirdest time in my 6 decades, that's for sure, man. I've never seen anything like that. And you know, dude, I'd be the first one to admit, you know, America is not perfection by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, compared to the rest of the world, it's a pretty good place. You know,
we have a First and even a Second Amendment. I mean, if one understands what this actually means in terms of, you know, free voice and even the ability to self-defend, although of course it's the lowest material level of it. But to give even your citizens that much trust and, or not just trust, but make it obvious that this is everyone's God-given as it is right. I mean, I would say that's, you know, not to be underestimated. And it's just curious to me how, I mean, this is kind of, I guess, the outside view, and it obviously doesn't apply to everyone. But generally, the view, I guess, for many outside of America is kind of, oh, Americans, they don't really know other places. Maybe you can talk more about this, about, how many Americans travel, because quite a few, of course, travel a lot and know many, many places and are very well informed. But it may also appear sometimes like, in a sense, you don't know how good you got it, but I'm in the same position because I live in Central Europe, Austria particularly. So it's the same situation here. But yeah, to me, the real thing I'm wondering about is how people don't notice that they've been lied to so blatantly, so strongly with all these hyped ideas, and no matter what they are called, whether it's the current, lockdown situations or any type of new racism, any type of new thing, that there is always ulterior motives.
And the lockdown thing, dude. De Blasio, who is the mayor of New York, there've been since the protests, there have been huge spikes in the coronavirus thing, and everybody is being held locked down. Businesses are still closed and can't operate. Man, the smaller businesses, middle class businesses, are suffering in just horrendous ways. Innumerable closings and people going out of business because they couldn't sustain it, and yet they won't let loose of that. So everybody's still locked down except the protests. And de Blasio this weekend just said, we're clamping down again because there's a spike going on in New York, or even as we speak. And he's like, shut down everything, religious gatherings of all denominations, like any parties, all the small little restaurant openings that were starting to happen, all that's been locked down again. They're threatening a $2,000 fine for not wearing that freaking worthless mask, and they left one exception for that, and that's the protests. So they're still encouraging people to gather en masse. I mean, some of the biggest ones were tens of thousands of people.
Even, you got to imagine this in small kind of Vienna, you could say maybe 2 million inhabitants. Just, let's say, the day after, I don't know, after they changed the lockdown rules again or something, but they will still pretty much in effect, like you're supposed, I mean, these are all not real laws usually, but you're supposed to distance and all of these orders they give on some level. And then you had, apparently, only by accident or whatever, by some city council member, a black woman in this case, she was like, oh, we have to support this idea as well. And they were, giving in the entry for this kind of announcement. And this is what they say. I really can't tell. I can believe them. I really don't know. They said they were just expecting 2,000 people for that kind of space, which they booked. But also not too surprisingly, because everyone till the week before had been told you can't go out. There's no clubs, there's no restaurants, there's nothing. I guess even more people were motivated to go there. And again, in small Vienna, if you will, with just maybe 2 million individuals, they had a gathering of, if what they say is true, 50,000 individuals.
Dude, crazy. Well, in Spain,
no problem at all, right?
In Spain, at the kind of early stages of this, they had the Women's Day March with 2 million people. Right after that, it was an explosion of cases in Spain. And it's like and this is not a political point of view for the right or the left, or it's just like, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it does if you look at it, from a conspiratorial sort of mode. It makes perfect sense. But I mean, how people aren't just kind of in an uprising, and I think that's a very real possibility here, an actual civil war. In fact, I think a civil war is already taking place. It's not with, overt guns, and although it's approaching that too, but I think there's already a civil war going on. From my scope of the information being put out, you know, it's not so much let's fix the system. It's let's tear the whole damn thing down. Well, what are you going to replace it with, man? I never hear that. I just hear, their jingles about, well, what's right and wrong. But how does that actually work? How does defunding the police actually work? Maybe before we do that, maybe there's be a good idea to like work it out and have a system that you think would be effective.
Everyone go meditate first, so you don't even get the idea of hurting someone else where you would need to call the police, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so, and I know for myself, I'm sure other people feel like this as well. I never really thought about race or religion or, I love connecting with, I live in Miami. It's an international place, man. People from everywhere. And that's so juicy. I love that. And I have always never really considered the race thing as part of an interaction with somebody. And recently, I find myself considering that before I interact with somebody. And I was giving myself crap the other day, man. Like, don't let them take away your openness and your desire to, connect with people. But that seems like that's really just taking place, and the whole like it's not a win-win, it's a win-lose scenario. It's opposite sides entrenched in their battle trenches, lobbing mortar shells at each other, and there's no discourse happening on how to actually fix it. And the two I grew up always considering myself a Democrat and a liberal, and I've always kind of stood for more liberal notions of things, especially like through the 80s where we had the evangelical like Christian thing where they were pushing their narrative, and I resisted that so hard. And I think a lot of what's happening now in a way is the opposite pendulum swing,
right,
of that point of view. But it's like, how do you fix it and make it better if now you're just if nobody's talking to each other, and your ideas about what you want for the country are so like extreme it's like, I don't want to live in a socialist country. I don't want to have my choices taken away. It's like I have a bunch of friends that are, we're social, we want it social. I'm like, well, dude, your whole life you've followed your dreams and you've made all these things happen that you wanted, that were your passions. In a socialist, especially communist scenario, you're told what to do, dude. You don't get dreams to go chase. You become.
Yeah, and I think.
Yeah,
you're right. And I think that, of course, too often, and the same, applied to me for a long time, it is greatly misunderstood, because even here you can use terms like socialism, communism, maybe to use other terms more appropriate like communitarianism, agorism, anarcho-pacifism, or whatever, which may be closer to what individuals may actually yearn for, but often the definitions are not very clear. And even here, I would say, even if one cannot agree or doesn't even understand the definitions properly, one can really look at what you just mentioned, whether in whatever is proposed, there is more regulation and force from one group or whatever being put over another and forced upon another, or whether there is more freedom. So it's always, is there more centralized control or is there more self-responsibility? And, while I'm all for all kinds of sharing systems and so on and supporting everyone, basically, I could also well imagine if, and this is ultimately where it hinges upon anyhow, even Jiddu Krishnamurti said, a physical revolution has never changed psychologically the human state. And I would very, very much agree with this.
So correct. Yes.
However,
absolutely.
we could even be in a, let's say, if there were a free market, and I'm also beyond that, but let's just say, assume, something like this could happen. We would have actually, free independent research and enterprise. Anyhow, they would develop free energy very quickly, in my estimation, if it's really free, because even now all the markets are heavily regulated, which is actually more like a socialist communist traits all over the world, with all the business regulations and, many unnecessary ideas. However, just to get to the point of what I actually wanted to say, I lost a train of thought right now, but you continue.
You look at how the people in China live, and the control that government exerts over its population.
Right.
To me, that's a nightmare.
And now I can tell you, and that's also a great example. I mean, there may be other issues, there's Falun Gong there. They may have their issues themselves, but, they apparently get harvested for organs and so on. But again, coming back to the basic idea, and this may even be the segue into the tablets, that I can just see any type of even outward change, systemic change, whatever you would like, is, well, you are only kind of ever going to get the system or society that you yourself are actually ready to participate in. And if you wanted to improve, then really you got to improve your own character. And if you're trying to skip over that and then just force everyone else to comply to whatever new idea you got, well, that's obviously not going to fly, because you can tell that you wouldn't want any other group to do that to you either. And here definitely, communication is the key, humility in a sense, and openness, real discourse, and also kind of understanding that, again, you make up, whether this is with, in my view, of course, the so-called lockdown or virus situation, or when then you pick up a group like the KKK or whatever, it's the really, really old strategy. You paint a new enemy that you can't really see or touch, but it's there and it's everywhere and it's so dangerous. And all the potential actual threats, that maybe your food is shit and your air is polluted and the Federal Reserve is ripping you off every day.
And you're bombarded with 5G microwaves.
Yeah. None of that is important anymore. And any kind of health or psychological or other issues you may be having, of course, it's now because of systemic racism and all the other factors, or because of coronavirus, and all the other factors just don't matter anymore. And it's so kind of crazy and sad to say, but if there's anything dangerous, then that's dangerous. Not to be able to clearly and neutrally see and feel what is, taking away my freedom, what is giving me more freedom and self-responsibility and choice and health. And if you even lose sight of that, then you can be told to do anything, and you'll just go along in good faith, where I'm really still wondering how people can have that good faith in, obvious media psychological operations, whether from lobby group, from news networks, from politicians. It's crazy.
And there's also the fear factor. Something that's happening in China that I find frightening beyond words, man. They've installed 5G cameras everywhere, and you are pretty much tracked from the moment you 24/7. They know what you're doing, and you get a rating. I think it's. I could be mistaken about this, but just for talking purposes, let me throw this out. It's like you get a rating, you get like 800 points a day. And each one of your actions, each person you talk to, each point of view you express either adds to that or takes away points. And say, like, I have an anti-government you and I are brothers living in the same place, and I have a derogatory statement about the government. Well, not only does my rating go down, but your rating goes down as well.
Sweet.
And depending on the amount of points you have, that determines what kind of food you can get, your access to transportation and services. And it's like, man, that is like the ultimate iron fist control of the population. And that just instills such a deep fear, like every single thing that you do, you're accountable for to, a group of people that are, come on, man. Any government is not about really taking care of people. It's about, exerting control and controlling the population, managing the population, and wow, there's just so many things going on right now that just find really just shocking.
Just as we're on topic, can I throw something else in? What I just saw recently, highly interesting. Apparently, a former FEMA employee of 20 years is discussing this. First of all, kind of showing the potential issues with the science and how this new threat seems to be quite contrived, but especially also mentions how she noted right from the beginning that they were using military code basically, and let's say FEMA type coding language in terms of waves and so on and so forth, and how they want to steer it. And also that, for example, the idea of being 6 feet apart is military protocol. The idea of understanding, you need to apply this and this, now in this case a mask, which even those subscribing to the idea of virus and infectious diseases know is completely useless, especially the way it's being used by everyone. But just to have them understand that, from now on, if you want to enter this and that, you need to comply to more rules. And now it's just a mask. You can wear a mask. It's not going to hurt you, right? And then it can be another regulation. And then, pretty quickly, you can be at the China level. And I'm kind of grateful for them, as little as I appreciate the system, but they also already have, the technocratic, centralist nightmare happening there already. So we can hopefully, ideally, take a very close look at it, understand that this is not a model that we wish for ourselves, but at the same time see how in many different ways, even before the lockdown, we already have similar systems like, super planned economy. You have kind of like oligarchs that get special favors from politicians and so on. Like, it's not really so different. It's just a bit of a, shinier veneer, and potentially, except for some very specific topics, you definitely have more freedom of speech in America and in Europe, I would say. But this then just means that we have a responsibility to speak out for the Chinese, but equally for ourselves, because, how does Bill Hicks say, if you let the demons run amok, right? Well, what's going to happen?
Yeah, exactly. There's another control thing coming up that just has me like in a dither, and that's this vaccine agenda that's being pushed forth. And there is a vaccine thing that has been developed. Curiously enough, the patent number for it is 060606. And the gig behind this is that the vaccine is not just a biological vaccine, but it also implants technology into you that then you're read by the 5G network. People know what your physical condition is by just running a scanner over you, and all kinds of scenarios, and that is that's not just hypothetical. That's already being played out in a beta scenario in a couple of counties in California, where that's actually being put into practice to see how it works. And man, as soon as that happened, you saw a plethora of videos popping up. Oh yeah, it's Revelations and the Mark of the Beast. Because the gig about the vaccine thing, it's not only that they can read you, but it's another kind of like China thing. Like, if you don't have that and you haven't been vaccinated, you can't ride public transport, you can't buy goods, you can't do anything. And it's
it's kind of great. End times is finally here, no?
There
managed
you go.
to do it, you know.
They really did. It's kind of it's. I keep having this strange like disconnect. Like I know it's real, but at the same time, it just feels like a really intense, like super long marathon science fiction movie. You know, it's crazy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, really crazy. Well, okay. Let's move into something happy.
Well, let's do that. However, I would actually very much suggest, and we can get into that, as we're going to talk about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, that we will find, great correlations. And, I'm not generally for over dramatizing things in a fearful way, but it seems to be a big drama and thriller. And I certainly have the impression that there's quite a few interesting parallels that may be derived from the Emerald Tablets, also very much applying to the current situation. However, before we go into that, what do you think about doing a music break and playing one of your favorite tracks?
That would be fantastic. That'd be great.
And we are back with the Wizard of Oz edition 18, now actually getting into the Emerald Tablets of Thoth.
Yeah, one of my favorite subjects. This is we've talked about this before, like how after you've read like one of the books, it's like has real knowledge in it, how you can grok it at a certain level. You continue learning, come back, a number of years later with a different perspective, and you see it on a whole nother level. And, I think this is the quintessential example of that. The Emerald Tablets are like the cornerstone of so many magical systems, especially in the West. And just really brilliant. And as I was, reviewing and refreshing my mindset for this, I read through that one of the translations again, and you just see it on like this whole new light of it like opens up and go, oh my God, how come I didn't see that before? Well, because you weren't ready. It's got its own level protectors, because the actual application of the principles, beyond the philosophical applications and spiritual applications, but the actual physical applications of it in the wrong hands are really, well, okay, here, this is a perfect example. Are you familiar with the history of Hermes Trismegistus, perchance? Like where he started and how that whole thing kind of came around? Have you explored that, Raphael?
Well, yeah, let's just say in fragments, and not to the extent that I could say, oh, I have a definite version of it, so kindly expand.
Okay. Before I go on with any more, I have to say that, first of all, the Emerald Tab physically, no one knows where they actually are. And there have been all kinds of facsimiles made that are on the internet, but there are no physical pieces of it. So consequently, there have been innumerable translations and things that differ slightly. But what I'm going to put out right now in my own exploration has been kind of a conglomeration of legends and the actual tablets themselves. And Hermes originally began in Atlantis, according to the legends, and he was a major sage there. But that culture had many sages, and they had secrets from what they call the primordial, which is, the universal light, God, whatever label you want to put on that, and many, 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 many secrets. And as everyone that studied Atlantis knows, the legend is that those were abused, and just caused the destruction and downfall of that civilization. And there were supposedly 10 emerald tablets that were distributed around the world. And as the conflict began, and the nefarious uses of the secrets became more and more intense, it caused the destruction of those. And many of the writings that I've scoped out said that there were 2 islands that kind of sank simultaneously. And from that zone, Toth sent groups from that to several different places in the world. One of them, and where he wound up, was the Egyptian culture. There also was a group that went to Peru and a group that went to Tibet, and they all had the secrets there. And Toth went to Egypt, and it's kind of curious as you look into some archaeological records and stuff. There was kind of a cultural explosion there. It wasn't a graded curve in evolution. It was kind of like
Right.
society was one way, and very quickly after that they were exploding in ideas and technology and creativity. And so Toth became a god, one of the gods in Egypt. The moon and the crescent over his head. So he lived there for a long time, like way more lifetimes than we actually live. And at the end of that time, he was going down to Amenti, which is the underworld, and that was a kind of death. And he placed the emerald tablets in a chamber near the entrance to Amenti, which is supposedly in the Great Pyramid. And he is also the one credited with putting a crystal pyramid at the top of the Great Pyramid to project truth and those concepts out into the ether for anyone that was enlightened enough to recognize it and grab it. It was out there. And as he went down to Amenti, his connection there was with the primordial again, and he got more and more secrets. And his character, in the writings, was kind of beyond reproach. So he was given the gift of eternal life. Which he chose to give up several times. Hermes Trismegistus means the thrice born. So his first scenario was going, after coming back from Egypt, he wound up then being called Hermes Trismegistus as a Greek, and that. Greek translation was the first translation that I was privy to, and it, again, has been translated in so many different ways that things kind of differ. So anyway, I wanted to. There are 14 statements, in the Emerald Tablet. that have become the basis and cornerstones of all Hermetic teachings. So I wanted to throw those out. There are many different translations of this that you can find online, but this is a good one. So the very first line is true without error. This is certain and most true. Number 2, and I mean, this is one that so many things have been built on. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of the one thing. I mean, if we'll go back and take these line by line and talk about specific meanings. The third one is, and as all things have been and arose from one by the meditation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The fourth, the sun is the father, the moon is the mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, and the earth is its nurse. And I love that one so deeply, and that's the basis of understanding the elements and how they flow together. Like my little elemental tarot card reading. The first column of cards is fire, and this and represents the energy surrounding that, then the pure energy. Then the next column is water, and that represents the emotional desire and the focusing of the energy, the primordial energy, into a specific direction. The third is the and relating that to that, the fire, the sun is the father. That's the energy. The moon is the mother. That's the intuition and the emotions. The wind hath carried it forth in its belly. So the third column is the air column, and that's about the mental plans and the structure and the reasoning to manifest that desire. And the the last one is the earth is its nurse. And that's the place where those, excuse me, where those three mother elements are then materialized in the manifest real world. And I use real world loosely because it seems real, but as we know, it's all an illusion. I'm coming to the conclusion that we really do live in a simulation. I keep trying to leave that and find another answer to that, but it seems like every road leads back to that conclusion.
Oh, totally. And I just think that if we can just see it as, let's say a simulation of consciousness within the consciousness, the mind of the one, it makes total sense to me, at least. And it also kind of resolves all these other issues, like people thinking, oh, it's a computer simulation or whatever. No, this is just a holodeck of consciousness. It's all in the mind of God, if you will.
Exactly.
That's just what it is. And it's cool because you don't need to upload yourself to become immortal or anything, or to gain any power or whatever. And if you, and I'm pretty sure you're on that wave as well, on that level, you can also see you even chose to come here because you're pretty crazy and pretty strong as well, probably, crazy in a good sense.
Yes.
And you really want to
Lunatic.
know, so yeah, yeah, lunatic for edition 18. Very good.
Yes, very good. Oh, yes. Okay, number 5 is the Father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Number 6, its force or power is entire if it is to be converted into earth. Number 7, separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. That's the one. There's the birth of modern alchemy, and consequently, a lot of the chemical sciences and physics to a degree. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. And that's all about transmuting things from one thing to another. Number 8, it ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth and receives the force of things superior and inferior, which harkens back to the second one, as above, so below. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. The whole philosopher's stone quest, that so many people have done, and the philosopher's stone is a subject in and of itself, because there's a whole school of thought that believes that the philosopher's stone is a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment, which I definitely believe that it is as well. But it is also a metaphor for how things get transmuted and changed here. And the process of that, in order to achieve those things, instructs you in ways, the way the one works and energy actually works. And you do find enlightenment, and it's meant to be a difficult puzzle, because the end result of that, with being able to create anything you want at a moment's notice just by focused thought, is, wow, that's a great concept, but it's also a scary one, man, because you think about some of the people that are trying to exert control over the world right now. If they had access to that, man, it'd be Atlantis all over again, except on a global scale, which may be happening anyway. Let's see here. By number 9, by this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Number 11, its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. And that's the essence of energy, and if you think about what we perceive as solidity, like, my piano here, it's solid, it's a thing, but it's only because that's the level of our perception. And you can't really, with your physical eyes, you can't see the fact that, no, it's just a bunch of particles held together with energy, but there is no solidity in that at all. And energy is God, in its purest form. And it's not just God, it's not just energy in one particular instance. It really is omnipotent and omnipresent, and it is what this universe and every other universe springs forth from. Number 12, so was the world created. Number 13, from this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereas the means or process here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. And last, the wrap-up is, that which I have said of the operation of the sun and moon is accomplished and ended. Yeah. So, have you put together the meaning of this for you, and has that evolved over the time that you were first exposed to it?
Well, what I can say is that I only checked out the original a few weeks ago or something, and I think I'm like 3/4 through the audiobook. I'm definitely gonna finish it and probably, gonna re-listen to it, maybe a few times even. All that I was kind of sensing from it, because I'm kind of familiar with like the some aspects of the Gnostic ideology. Then, of course, the Bashar and channeled material. There is a series called Spirit Science. There's probably even some other books I read that are referencing it or kind of telling the same story in a slightly different clothing. Because the way, unless I'm completely wrong now, but the way I'm getting it is, number one, it delivers you these like tools and laws and so on. And I mean, for example, of course, I'm a big fan of the Kabbalion by Free Initiates, where also these aspects are incorporated. And
yes, I love that as well. Yeah, we'll probably talk about that a little bit too. I have my copy of it right here.
Oh yeah, and then just the other view, I guess, would be the idea of the, archons versus eons, or X-share versus X-protect, or positive Gnostics versus negative Illuminati, or whatever you want to call it. Kind of like showing, or even just in terms of Ra law of one, showing the different choices of polarity and how there have been like just, different choices, therefore different groups and certain dynamics. And I'm not sure exactly how deeply this also kind of goes into the dramatized idea of, reincarnation and so on. Maybe you can expand upon it a little bit here.
Well, the whole reincarnation thing, part of my training has been there early in your training, your wow, let's see. Okay, you're shown your death. You actually experience your death. You leave your body. You see your dead corpse laying there, which was woo, it's stinky. It's like, oh my word. And where you go after that, where I went anyway, and certainly the other people studying this particular flow, it's a little different than people think, and I don't think you're absolutely guaranteed reincarnation. And I think a lot of the legends and myths of different religions, have kind of taken pieces of this truth and manifested it in their own scenario, like the Egyptians. Like when you die, your heart is weighed, and if it's as light as a feather, then you get second chance where your identity stays intact, and you come around again with
Right.
that memory accessible to you. And the other alternative for that is if it clunks on the floor, it's like way heavier, then you get eaten by the crocodile. and I think that there are circumstances where it's possible for you not to come back but to be disassembled and recycled and reconstructed in some other fashion that doesn't hold any of your personal identity before. It's like your particles and your energy and your pieces have been disseminated and put forth out in different configurations, and that is that was kind of a crazy realization for me. And I think that's one of the scenarios that gets exposed in an ayahuasca journey, especially your first, maybe your second journey. A lot of people experience some really kind of horrendous entities in that space, and those are your own personal demons, not things outside you, but those are things that exist on the lower astral that you need to be able to progress through in whatever fashion that you can. The Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about the wrathful deities, and there are so many, the Egyptian Book of the Dead that we just mentioned. There's a lot of those narratives out there kind of reflect that in different metaphors, but like in an ayahuasca trip, my first one was a dressing, man. I'm yeah, I'm a bizarre, intense person, man. So it would stand to reason that my demons would be kind of gnarly, So the good thing about an ayahuasca journey, though, is if you kill and resolve those issues in your ayahuasca trip, those stay changed, and you don't have to address those when you leave this particular chunk of consciousness and move on into the other ones. And that's a lot, you hear sometimes, that there's a dark section right after you're dead, and people go through some kind of scary stuff there, and those are scenarios that are in my experience actually real. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of got off on the what happens after you die scenario.
Yeah, so basically you would be saying, like, in terms of demons being real or hell being a real place?
I'm not really talking about hell being a real place, but I'm talking about the lower astral. It's just like,
right, exactly, of course.
Yeah, and that is a dark place. That's not a place of joy and happiness and growth. That's a place of dissolution and dissolving and chaos and anarchy and those, and when I say demons, I'm really using that metaphorically. It's you and your issues come back around to take assessment of what kind of progress you've made, and that was kind of a trip. and then there's a whole chunk that then you go through to get to the other side of a void, that then new possibilities, and that's where new life happens, a regeneration and a rebirth into a new form to live out a new set of opportunities and lessons to live with. Yeah.
I guess the one thing that many individuals are understandably scared of, and is also sometimes is interwoven into certain variants of Gnostic teachings, maybe even kind of here in terms of being eaten by the crocodile and so on, that they kind of fear, let's say, ego dissolution. However, I would say that there is many layers of that. So I see it in a sense that each and every one now having a particular perspective will always experience a particular perspective and remain with the self-identification as this is me. Although, of course, this may greatly transform from a human to an alien to a ghost to a soul to a planet, a universe.
I think a perfect example of that is, we've talked many times about about your ally, which is in fact you living on a higher frequency, and I just completed that whole connection with him, and I also think I mentioned I got really curious, like if and it's the perfect example of the as above so below premise, because as you think about that, your ally is greatly evolved. Their civilization is very, very different. Like in my connection with him and communicating with him and us learning about each other, he didn't really get there's no money there, and I had to educate him about how our world and this existence
What?
works.
Scarcity? What are you talking about?
They value different things there, man, and their barter system, if you care, I really shouldn't use that, but their system relates to accomplishments and doing things and their involvement and growth, and So if you think about, okay, he inhabits, the next 6 bands of your aura out from you. And then as you extrapolate that and go out past that, your ally has an ally, and your ally's ally has an ally. And each one of those incarnations of you or aspects of you resembles a human less and less and less. So as that frequency increases and increases and increases and increases, I think that the the ultimate end result of that is, in fact, the dissolution or the need, the loss of the need for your personal ego, and the reality and desire for connection to the whole, and to re-establish that connection. But that's many levels away. And then in the reverse, as below, I got very curious, as I was preparing over the years for my connection to my ally. And I'm like, well, dude, if there's one above me, then there've got to be some below me. And I got very curious about that. One day I asked my teacher, and said, dude, what about that? And he goes, just kind of made this grunt, like, oh. I'm like, what's for, man? He goes, well, you can do what you want, but that's not a really happy place. And being who I am, I said fuck it, and had to go down and scope it out. And the me that was down there that I found is like, wow, primitive, and just like as de-evolved a me as my ally is an evolved me. And it just made me aware that, like, going down and down, I would imagine that, another few down, and this harkens to the 9 levels of hell, Dante's whole thing. I would imagine that as you go down further and further, you would eventually reach what, scholars and philosophers and clerics have defined as hell. Maybe not in the specific, pictorials of what that is, certainly energetically, and whereas your ego becomes lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as you progress up, your ego becomes denser and denser and denser and denser. Ooh. So I got on the phone after I did that with my teacher, and it took me a couple days, and I just went to the very first level very briefly. I didn't hang around there to explore. It was like, man, just the initial taste, the sound, the energy flowing around, the smell. Oh my God, dude, the smell was just beyond, like, get me out of here. So I get on the phone with my teacher, and I'm like, okay, we were talking about the lower astral, the lower ally, and he goes, you went, didn't you? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, what'd you think? And I'm like, oh. And man, it's kind of,
it's great.
It really is. It's kind of crazy. So
puts it into perspective, right?
It really does, and it gave me a really tangible, example of that. As above, below. As above, so below. Applies if you put that lens on anything you focus on. It applies. Take our physical bodies. And we were just talking about solidity a moment ago. As you go down, you hit the molecular level, you hit the atomic level, you hit the subatomic level, and they thought that was the end, but that was only because we had no tools to be able to register that, and now, it was the Higgs boson, the theoretical thing. So they built the Hadron Collider, and start
interesting thing in itself.
Yeah, and breaking apart particles into smaller particles, and yes, actually confirmed that even those particles existed as well. And I would put forth, I'm sure you probably agree with this, that that's the limit of our technological ability to see. So scientifically proving that there are more lower than that probably doesn't exist, at the moment. But I would venture, and my own belief is that there are as many smaller particles, below us as there is infinity. That never stops. And to reverse that, uh, you go out to the cellular level, you go out to the physical world level, you go out to planets, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, the multiverse, and then that's just within the frequency of our existence here, and you extrapolate that out into the many other astral levels that are only reachable through your sight and ability to go there. Those things go out in infinite levels as well. And I think that is a premise that you look at. You look at the I go out in the garden frequently and watch the denizens of the garden. I've got all these lizards and snakes and birds.
Oh, nice.
And insects of all kinds. I've got a bunch of plants that attract butterflies, and they show up and lay eggs on them, and all of a sudden you see the pupa and the cocoon and the pupa, and then it explodes out into this transformed thing and flies off, only to be recycled again, faster and faster and faster. So in every direction, it's that exemplified, energy consuming energy.
And just as you speaking of butterflies, maybe this may in some degrees be a good analogy for varying levels of ego death. In a positive sense, this just means identification with something greater or a higher version of yourself. Also in relation to the evolution of human consciousness and therefore human society. As far as I understand, there are these special so-called imago, whatever cells that occur during this transformation, but that actually my English is failing me. The butterfly is a cocoon, and before it is a cocoon, it is a, how do you call it? If you know what I'm saying. So, actually, I'm gonna look.
It's a pupa. I couldn't find the mute button.
That's cool. Okay, let me just see actually what it says here. Caterpillar would be the usual name to use for me, right? Yeah. So, but anyhow, in the between stage, when it's a cocoon, apparently the whole thing like liquefies or something. So it's like really a quite extreme process where you may well, quote unquote, imagine, that you're dying, but you're actually not. You're just transforming. And I feel very much individually and collectively, many are going through the same things, having great fear. But if you, I don't know what else to say than, stay true to your heart, you may very well come out the other side within this incarnation, within this society, but just you and the society greatly and potentially also very positively transformed.
I've mentioned this book before, but I can't put forth its importance to me enough, and that is the Red Book by Carl Jung, and that travel deeply into your darkness, into your subconscious, and into your your lower subconscious thoughts, where things are boiling and happening, but people really are afraid of that. and that fear keeps us prisoner, and following the path that Jung laid out for me. I went and addressed some things that were scary, but at the same time, it's like the Nine of Swords. When you're laying there, and I'm referring now to the Rider-Waite version of it, where the guy's laying on the bed and there are 9 swords hanging over his body, waiting to drop. And that, to me, well, we're air signs, so you probably relate to this as well. My own mental craziness of imagining outcomes. When I'm in that zone, the things I'm thinking about are possibilities. Oh, this is gonna suck. It's gonna be horrible. It's gonna hurt. Oh no, it's gonna kill me. And I lay there and lay there and lay there, and finally the swords drop and you're dead. And you realize in that moment, well, I'm not really dead. And it did hurt a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, And my Red Book journey was very similar to that. There were some aspects of me, as Carl Jung had a Christian kind of history and upbringing from his youth. You get a lot of the Judeo-Christian metaphors, materialize for you in your own reality. And, I was raised a good Catholic kid. So, I went and talked to the devil. I went and talked, I met all of those things that scared the shit out of me and faced those
What did the
scenarios.
devil say, if he said anything, just for kicks?
The devil said a lot of things, but I don't usually do this, but that's kind of so personal that I can't really share that.
Right, of
here.
course.
Suffice
I was actually more fishing for generic stuff, or whatever revelation you could deduce from that particular interaction, let's say, or understanding.
Yeah, my relation, my understanding from that was that the devil is part of us, our own construct, and is there to express limitation in order for us to achieve our freedom. Again, in the Rider-Waite deck, you've got the devil sitting up on his throne with a female and a male slave on chains with big collars around their neck. And it looks like, oh, they're trapped, they're held, they're prisoner. Well, if you look closely at the collars that are around their neck, they're huge. And at any moment, they could decide to take those things off. And it's their choice to stay there and whatever that is, and that takes on so many different manifestations in this lifetime, addiction and all kinds of the baser levels. And if you choose to purchase those and decide to keep them, then you will in fact be a slave to that. And you've given over your power to something outside of yourself.
Though in defense of Shaitan, I would also say that if I look at it mechanically, aside from the idea, of course, as you say, that it allows us to give us a challenge, as Manly Palmer Hall also describes in The Secret Teachings in the chapter Kabbalistic Keys to the Creation of Man. It is perfectly described. It's available for free everywhere. I would also say that without the energy of limitation, there would be no experience at all. So
exactly, yes.
Everyone can decide how greedy they want to get, kind of. And even here, it's a matter of perspective, because even the worst don't even want to say these things. The worst things you can imagine, if it is all just a thought within the mind of the one, then even there, nothing really that gets destroyed. No one really ever gets hurt, and nothing can really ever get lost. But yeah, and I'm all for, having a more, butterfly and enjoyable, relaxed reality. But I think it's great also to just understand that even limitation can serve a positive purpose. The point is just, especially now for us that we become aware of it, to apply it appropriately, right?
That's correct, because that card, while it is generally seen as kind of a negative card, and on the flip side of that, I don't believe any of the cards are absolutely good or absolutely bad. I think depending on your perspective and the intent for where it's going, that all of those cards have positive and negative traits. And the devil card is like about ambition and raw energy and lots of really great things, that can be used, and the last thing on the Red Book thing, that whole journey, and the devil was just one minuscule. Like, I spent a year and a half on that journey, like going there a lot, and I realized, the point of that journey was to address all of my fears, all of them. And I didn't really realize, I would never have said in my conscious, preamble to doing it, that there would be so many fears and so many things that I kept myself prisoner with. That then the cool part about that journey is that those fears, it's similar to an ayahuasca scenario as well. Those fears sort of crystallize in a way that relates to you and present themselves for you to either run away from or address. And after the first few of them, after I didn't run away and I stuck with it and watched them dissolve and no longer be fears for me, that was amazing. That was amazing. That was amazing. And at the end of that, after going through, because I'd spent a lot of time on my conscious awareness and my desire to evolve and to progress and to learn, but I had shied away from addressing the darker stuff just because I was afraid of what I would find. And that fear alone, that's another 9 of Swords moment.
Exactly.
The fear of what you're going to find, that keeps you from finding what you need to find, and at the end of that, I felt that really did change my life in a very profound way, not just a little way, but I conducted myself differently ever since. And I find myself in a much less fearful place. Although, the game shows up with new challenges to test that resolve. and far from passing that test every time, I do fail miserably quite frequently, but I'm not afraid to go back and address it again, which was one of the things that came out of the Red Book thing for me. So
yeah, that's usually what they say anyhow, is like whatever, shadows, demons, however you want to see it, it only can appear even a bigger threat or fear if actually you do not dare to look at it. But as soon as you look at whatever, the light of consciousness, in a sense, illuminates all darkness always through unconditional love. At least that's my experience in this incarnation. And that's the simple process and simple method. It comes back to self-honesty and the willingness to change and to know yourself. Also, eventually, with the wisdom that everything is fine, always has been, always will be, anyhow, seen from the unity perspective of the one. And at least to me, this also greatly helps then to be, in that sense, bold and courageous in any action, including self-investigation. Because anyhow, as Bashar likes to say, all you find in the unknown is always only more of yourself.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And actually owning and having the courage to look at your real you and not the veneer of your own goodness and your intellectual, perfection and like, you know, all the shams that the ego comes up with to prop us up. You know, when you're willing to let those go and actually look at how flawed and in need of evolution we are in this incarnation, you know, it's a very freeing thing. And you know, the concept that you know, the more I learn, the dumber I realize I am. Awesome. I love that. You know, you don't sit on your things that you've learned and, you know, use that as a barometer about how much better you are than someone else. You know, you use that as a barometer on you know, how far you've gotten along the path of learning. You know, and that, you know, we started this conversation with the whole like civil unrest, social justice thing happening right now. You know, I think that's one of the things that I find most unfortunate about the way things are being conducted right now, is that there seems to be like, you know, everybody's judging everybody else. Everybody's, you know, cancel culture. What the fuck, dude? Like, you said something I didn't like, so we're going to destroy your life. What?
Yeah. Whatever you just did offended me, so you're not allowed to do it anymore.
So
It's so awesome.
You're not only not allowed to do it, but now we're going to crush you in every aspect of you because you said something I didn't like. What the dude? It's just so crazy. It really is.
Yeah, but also I guess what it points to is this also kind of understandable but great insecurity many individuals must feel, or disenfranchisement and so on and so forth, that they then start communicating and maybe even being aggressive towards others in this way. That's kind of one of the things I see.
Yeah, you know, I think all of that comes out of fear as well. You know, and I think if everybody just took that journey inside to discover truth, well, then truth starts to get healed, and then a lot more connection is made, and you know, the whole like, you have to think the way I think or you're evil, you know, goes away, which is just you know, I love the free expression of ideas, ridiculous, inane, brilliant, like whatever, man, say it. Let me think about it. You know, that's the other thing that I hope comes back around soon, is the ability to divorce yourself from your own concepts and belief long enough to put yourself as much as you can into the perspective of someone else,
Empathy, yes.
and actually evaluate their point of view from their point of view. You know, that was one of the greatest things about the Bardon companion book, you know, that part about transmuting consciousness to another thing, you know, whether that's an animal or another person, and being able to do that and go inside and kind of get that situational assessment from, you know, not your point of view assessing it, but their point of view in as pure a form as you can achieve at that level, really, really valuable. And all of a sudden you find yourself, like you just said, with empathy for other people's position and situations and points of view, you know. And I think that's a really productive state for humanity as a whole, you know.
So actually, I'd even say empathy itself, because then you say you find yourself with empathy. I would kind of say that the ability to even feel empathy may even actually just be almost prerequisite to open up the mental structures enough, maybe liquefy them enough, that for that moment they become malleable, so you can really put yourself into someone else's position. I really strongly feel that this is at least as much an emotional process as it is an intellectual exercise. And I guess this gets missed too often as well.
I couldn't agree more. And what I see happening everywhere right now is not an intellectual process, but a purely emotional knee-jerk reaction, you know, and people are so quick to judge and put a sentence on what that means, without any
Yes.
rational thought, void of an emotional judgment. Dangerous point of view.
Yeah, it seems, we also get to experience the extremes in this incarnation. It seems, was there something in particular more you wanted to mention about this, or about the tablets?
I was pretty much done with that, but I wanted to. I kind of broke down each of the lines of the Emerald Tablet into a couple of word phrases, and we certainly can't get through all of them, but I think the first one would be really cool to do. And this particular translation, the first line is, "I speak not fiction, but what is certain and most true." And the term "I speak," like in the Christian Bible and in lots of different things, the beginning of creation was in the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that implies that sound vibration was the very first cause or effect upon creation. And that's one of the premises from the 7 principles out of the Kybalion. Everything is cause and effect. And in this particular instance, the fact that it was sound really resonates with me. Everything in the universe, from the incomprehensible, to the most exalted thought, even black holes, flows from I and carries the essence of its materialization, so to speak. But that whole things emanating from a primordial initial sound, I that's been something I believed for a really, really long time, but I didn't make that connection with that first line for a number of years. Let's see. Yes. And down to what is certain and most true. And most true, potential, desires expression. And within the dual nature of the mind, which is another premise from the Kybalion, or a principle from the Kybalion, everything is duality. Inherent within the dual nature of the mind, which is both male as life and female as law, law meaning universal structure, is will, which in turn empowers mind to desire, express itself through conception. Their offspring is love or reality of lawful life, which is the most true, and what is more lovable than the truth itself, their son. Oh yes, and if you take that as not SON but SUN, not accidental. Law and truth, the spirit, body, the soul, Mercury, salt, sulfur, the universal trinity that you see expressed in innumerable systems of learning. Yeah. We're kind of running up on the end of the road on this. Let's see, are there any other ones?
Well, all I can just reinforce, of course, always have to keep mentioning Bashar. Even their civilization, the Sasani, share some things about themselves. One of the things they always bring up, and again, supposedly, they're human gray hybrids, so very much related to us and our culture. And they always say that their favorite number is 3.
Well, 3 is the magic number. You'll have to get that song. 3 is the magic number. Yeah. So you just mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about for a long time. The Sasani are human gray hybrids, meaning that they're a future race of us that is coming back in time to communicate to us. Would you explain that to me a little bit?
Oh, sure. So, basically, what they are is they are a so-called future parallel reality, let's say. That's what they inhabit. According to their own information, they say they exist in about 300 years in the future. That's kind of, let's say, where they are contacting us from, in a direction of the constellation Bryan. This is where their star called the Shah is located. However, it is not visible to us yet, as this is, all this kind of process of divine marriage that is still occurring. That refers to the idea that the Sasani species is a perfect 50-50 hybrid between current Earth humans, so we could kind of say us and the human population now in the past decades, with a future parallel version of humans, which are the so-called Greys. Because the Greys, so the small gray aliens, although there's also different factions and kind of assortments of these, one of those at least simply is humans far off in the future, where they stopped procreating through, let's say, biological means, but only through genetics. They had huge fights because they tried to deny their emotions in favor only of whatever they deemed rationality. But this ended up in huge planet-wide wars and destruction, and let's just say, in whatever type, making the surface not hospitable anymore. So they were moving underground. That's why they became smaller and gray and all of that. However, they also did develop a very strong hive mind. However, this was more the hive mind of conformity. They had then telepathy, but they did not allow any more for freedom of expression individually, because again, they deemed emotion and these aspects simply as too dangerous and unpredictable. However, eventually they realized that even through genetic splicing, they could not develop anymore. So they saw the end of their genetic line. And as they still had, at least a survival instinct, they realized that they needed to tunnel back into our reality now to gather viable genetic material to create the hybrid species, one of them, the Sasani, of which Bashar is a member of, in order to allow the procreation of the species and give us the benefit of kind of like skipping potentially thousands, millions, who knows how long, years of evolution, because in a sense, one particular timeline has come back to us, created our children with them, who are now calling us to tell us, look, guys, you kind of already went down this, I'm deliberately saying this now, understood in the bad centralized sense, a communist, conformist route. This is what happened. We're now coming back, sharing all this basically emerald tablets of Toth and know yourself knowledge with you. And our backstory actually is that this one great choice you have about going into completely centralized control, technotronic era in the bad sense, dystopia, already happened. So now you can gain that experience now already and potentially be more clear about your choices.
Hey, I just out of curiosity, in your many channelings with that, have you ever experienced them referencing any of our magical texts, like the Emerald Tablet or the Pymander, or any of the other versions of magical exploration?
Yes. So what I can say is, of course, my own channel in that sense on the human side is filled with the information I'm aware of. Therefore, that is naturally what is being referenced. In terms of Bashar and, let's say, the general Sasani view on these things, is that oftentimes they are, referenced as important and valid ideas. Bashar also has quite particular backstories on certain aspects of Jesus and so on and so forth. But generally, I would say they are acknowledged and potentially even mentioned, as being seeded depending, like Bashar has his own backstory on the Anunnaki as well and what happened then. But I would say he's maybe not by himself and only few times. He's only sometimes referencing particular books, even popular current books or older scriptures. But certainly he's aware of those when he's being asked about it by someone.
Yeah, seeding. That's exactly what we started with.
Exactly. And
yeah,
just to mention this briefly, because we're into all this, I'm into this Tartaria research and whatever happened to the giants and so on, also puts into different perspectives all these depictions of the gods and why are they so huge in relation to the normal people. Maybe really everything can be seen, both symbolic and literal, because I could well imagine, whatever Atlantean society was, that some of those who may have been quite taller were then, going around seeding different civilizations and cultures. And there is just one example with Attila Grandpierre, who wrote on the royal magi, ancient people of the royal magi, the Magyars. I may have mentioned this before, but he's also having this kind of origin story saying that there is a certain culture and certain kind of priests, a kind of exodus, and then they were seeding different cultures and different civilizations. Also would make sense because if you look closer, you can really tell that at the basic level and the not too highly distorted level, the core symbolism and lore is the same all around, let's say, the known surface of the planet. Just with slightly different culturally appropriate iconography. Would you agree?
I definitely would agree. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious, did they, was the Emerald Tablet ever referenced in any of your channelings?
I think in the ones I did myself, as such, no, but I'm definitely certain that varying levels of the content that is within was mentioned, just because I'm aware, as I said, of similar concepts, and the basic understanding, I would say, is consistent across much of those.
I have, we're talking about, we sort of like change gears, but the whole alien thing right now, I'm like really enjoying seeing the plethora of just outstanding videos and like, wow, crazy things. It's like,
Like UFOs and stuff?
Yeah, pretty amazing. I can't wait for them just to like kind of land and let's do a day the Earth stood still.
Yeah, I
Come
mean,
on
even
up.
here,
Where's Gort?
yeah, I mean, I want to mention this again because I know you're aware of it, but even Aleister Crowley said that he was apparently channeling, again, some variant. I reiterate, there are many factions and frequency levels, but apparently he was even channeling this IWAS or whatever, like some variant of a gray entity. Yeah, which also doesn't seem to be too surprising to me. And now I'm going to spin this a bit further. Assuming it was a gray entity and maybe not, the most positively and enlightenedly polarized one, knowing all the connections, I think, with Barbara Bush, NASA, and all these strange like power structure things, I could even well imagine that they got some, I don't know, news updates or whatever, also in terms of, how to control people. And I'm not, gonna judge or blame everything on Crowley now. I'm neutral on it. But just like seeing how the information may flow and that even here, there may be some kind of, let's call it properly, extra dimensional story involved. But I mean, obviously, what else could it be, right? But it would be interesting if it's like
exactly.
related in the same way that, who knows, maybe this gray entity ghost he's been talking to was a future human in that reality, and maybe also as one aspect giving ideas like how can you get to there, and of course maybe for some this is attractive. I don't know.
Yes, that's true. Well, a lot of times when people talk about aliens, I think they only think about one or two, manifestations
Right.
of those. But there's as many aliens as there are, walking through New York City and different kinds of people, and everybody's got their own agenda, and they do too. you know?
Oh yeah, and even within the idea of human evolution and the varying points of genetic manipulation, it appears like all of us contain all kinds of technically extra dimensional DNA already. We're all hybridized already to a great extent. There's also the argument, which I would very much agree with, which would very much point towards the idea of us and the human form being artificial. Again, doesn't make us victims because the one is all, the all are one, but being artificially created because recently I saw this in the video and I discussed this with a friend as well, is that it's really unnatural that we have a vessel. However, we need shelter. We need all these kind of things to really be comfortable. Whereas most animals that naturally evolved here have no issue with all of these aspects at all. And this could, of course, be one aspect of civilization as well, because technically you can live in the woods and so on. But even then, you can't really get without, advanced levels of shelter and food and so on.
Well,
So, yeah.
it is the world is a jungle, but the thing about that is when you go to immerse yourself in the purest of the jungle, say like for real, your focus no longer is really on your involvement or, you're thinking about staying alive, not getting eaten. What are you going to eat? How do I not freeze to death? How do I not roast to death? Where's water? I mean, a focus of life becomes very, very different at that point, And I think that's part of the global unrest right now is people just have too damn much time on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, partially, but also in a sense, not knowing where to direct their energy or potentially even their anger or actually their creative energy, how to, use it wisely, how to channel the right frequencies. Yeah. However, just to reaffirm the idea of infinite realities, I recently saw a great video. I'll send it to you and also mention it here by Stuart Swerdlow, that's Swerdlow, survivor of the Montauk Project with Laura Eisenhower. And he appears to be, one of these X-Men children back then, and talks about all kinds of tech they developed, including like a technical device to have thoughts manifest instantly. So kind of getting along the way that we mentioned in this show. And also, basically, he agrees with the idea that they realize there's infinite timelines, infinite realities. And what he's also confirming, which Bashar also always likes to bring up when he's being asked about the time-space question and grandfather paradox, I believe it's called, that he said they actually tried to, through time and space and start manipulating timelines to kill someone or change something. But then they realized that every time they enter that, they're actually creating an entirely different stream. They're accessing a new time-space timeline. So there is not just one timeline you can manipulate at will. And that to me would also speak towards the idea that, and he's mentioned this specifically, that any and all imaginable and for us yet unimaginable configurations of all universes and realities and possibilities already do exist in the eternal here and now.
That really boggles your mind, doesn't it? It's so hard to like completely wrap your brain around that because it's so enormous. But yes, I totally agree.
Yes. So well, that's where we're at, I'd say. Any last comments?
I just would strongly encourage anyone that is unfamiliar with the Emerald Tablet to get it and not just superficially read it, but meditate on each of those lines and see where it goes for you. It's an amazing, amazing journey. And if you have read it even multiple times, break it back out, give it another roll and experience the new level of it because it really is one of those universal documents of real actionable knowledge, and just it is proven to be such a a positive and useful piece for me. I'd love for others to share that as well if they haven't already. And other than
Awesome.
that, it was a really amazing talk. It went by really fast. It's 11:11.
Perfect. Yes, and to everyone interested in checking it out, I guess there may be even somewhat different versions available online. I also saw there is a YouTube audiobook versions available as well.
There's really good YouTube things that go into the whole history of Toth. That yeah, there are a couple great videos out there.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks everyone for listening. And
Thank you.
Talk next within the Eternal Now. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. I'll talk to you soon, Raphael. Everybody be good.
Enjoy yourselves.